Romano's glass shattered beside my shoe when I said, "Perdino." Every sound in that dining room died. The silver fork in my hand slipped against the china. A sharp little click. Too loud. Too lonely. 8 people from the DeLuca family inner circle had been speaking over one another a second earlier, voices cold and polished, like knives dragged across marble. Then my one Italian word landed between us, and even the household staff froze with the serving trays still in their hands. I should have kept quiet. I was only there because I had filled in for another waitress at a private charity dinner in the DeLuca estate. That was the lie on the invitation, anyway. A fundraiser. Old money. Good wine. Men in tailored suits pretending their hands were clean. I had spent the whole night keeping my eyes down and my breathing even. Because everyone in New York knew one thing about Romano DeLuca. He had not spoken in 3 years. Not after the stroke. Not after the family war. Not after whatever had happened inside this house that nobody outside ever dared ask about. He sat at the head of the table under a chandelier the size of a car, one hand curled against the armrest, jaw hard, eyes burning with the kind of trapped fury that makes everyone else lower their voice. Luca DeLuca sat 2 seats away from him, still as stone, one wrist resting near his wineglass, watching every person in the room like he already knew how they would betray him. I had felt his eyes on me twice that night. That alone should have scared me into silence. But then one of the older men at the table leaned too close to Romano and said, soft enough to sound respectful, cruel enough to leave a bruise, "If he can't answer, we move forward." Something inside Romano changed. I saw it before anyone else did. His fingers spasmed. His throat worked. His face twisted with humiliation so raw it made my chest ache. Nobody moved to help him. Nobody stopped the man. They just watched him drown inside his own silence. And I knew that look. My grandmother had worn it after her stroke. The trapped panic. The rage of still being fully there while everyone around you started speaking as if you were furniture. So before fear could grab me by the throat, I stepped closer and whispered the word she used to answer with when speech failed her. Perdino. Forgiveness. Or maybe, in our house, it had meant something softer. Try again. I'm still here. Romano's hand jerked. The crystal glass hit the floor and burst. A woman near the end of the table gasped. One of the rival crew observers, near the far archway, straightened so fast his chair scraped backward. The air changed. Not surprise. Danger. Because Romano was staring straight at me. Not through me. At me. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then his fingers slammed once against the table, hard enough to rattle the silverware. Lucas stood. The room seemed to rearrange itself around that one motion. Men in black suits moved at once from the walls. One of them came toward me. Another stepped between Romano and the rest of the table. Across the room, I caught a flash of movement near the archway where the 3 rival observers had been standing too quietly all night. One of them reached inside his jacket. I did not think. Luca had been the one controlling the room until then. Not this time. I grabbed the heavy serving pitcher from the sideboard and hurled it. It smashed into the man's wrist before he could pull the gun free. He cursed. Metal clattered across the floor. Then everything exploded. A body hit the table. A woman screamed. A second rival observer shoved a chair into one of Luca's men and lunged toward Romano. I moved before I understood I was moving. Around broken glass. Past the end of the table. Straight to Romano. Glass bit into the sole of my shoe as I reached the head of the table. The room had gone from candlelight and crystal to raw noise in less than a breath. A chair scraped. Someone cursed. Silver rolled across the marble floor like coins in a church. Romano DeLuca did not flinch. That terrified me more than the gun. His hands rested on the arms of his chair. His eyes stayed fixed on the man charging toward him, but there was no panic in them. No confusion. Just a blank, old pain that looked practiced. The kind a person wears after surviving too much. I threw myself between them anyway. The rival observer slammed into me hard enough to drive the air from my lungs. My hip struck the edge of the table. White light burst behind my eyes. I still caught Romano's shoulder with one hand and shoved, trying to turn his chair away from the attack. Then Luca DeLuca arrived. I did not see him cross the room. I felt him in it first. The impact, the violence of a man who had stopped pretending this was still a dinner. He hit the attacker from the side with such force that both men crashed into a fallen chair. Wood snapped. A low, animal sound tore through the room. Men in dark suits moved all at once after that. Controlled. Ruthless. One pinned the first attacker against the wall. Another drove the second to the floor. The third rival observer never reached the door. In 3 seconds, the chaos had shape again. In 3 more, every gun in the room pointed away from Romano and toward the men who had come to test Luca inside his own house. My chest burned. I was still bent over Romano's chair, one palm pressed to the old man's coat, as if my hand alone had kept him in this world. Then I felt Luca looking at me. Not grateful, not soft, shocked. I straightened slowly. My hair had fallen loose. My right hand was cut from the broken pitcher. Blood slid over my wrist and dripped onto Romano's white linen napkin. Nobody spoke. Not the household staff. Not the 8 people from the DeLuca family inner circle frozen around the wrecked table. Not even the 3 men on the floor, though one of them groaned through clenched teeth. Luca crossed the distance between us with murder still in his face. Why did you do that? His voice was low, deadly calm, worse than shouting. I looked at the blood on my hand, then at Romano. Because nobody else was close enough. That was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth sat in my throat like glass. The old man's expression, the silence around him, the way everyone in that room feared him, pitied him, obeyed him, but never touched him, never spoke to him directly, as if he had already become a portrait before he was dead. Luca's jaw tightened. You should have gotten down and left him. The question came out sharper than I meant it to. It cut through the room. A few people lowered their eyes. One of the household staff near the sideboard actually crossed himself. I saw it then. Not just fear. Ritual. Something old lived in this house. Older than Luca's power. Older than the polished marble and imported wine and men posted at every entrance. Something had trained every person here to keep distance from the man at the head of the table. Romano's fingers twitched beneath mine. It was small. So small I almost doubted it. But I felt it. Luca saw me notice. Step away, he said. No, the word left my mouth before caution could stop it. His inner circle stiffened. The air changed again, but this time the danger was not bullets. It was defiance. Luca took one more step. You don't understand what you're doing. Maybe I didn't, but I understood silence. I understood what it cost when a whole room agreed to keep one alive by treating him like he was already gone. The chandelier light turned the marble floor cold as ice, and every face in that room waited for Luca DeLuca to crush me for saying no. Instead, he looked past me. Romano DeLuca had moved. Not much. Just 2 fingers lifting from the armrest of his chair. A small motion. Weak. Barely there. But inside that house, it landed like a gunshot. I heard one of the household staff pull in a breath. I saw 2 men from the DeLuca family inner circle trade a look so fast they probably thought no one caught it. Even the 3 rival crew observers near the back straightened, greedy for any crack in the stone. Romano DeLuca's eyes were on me. Luca DeLuca noticed it too. His jaw tightened, but his voice came out low and controlled. Everyone out. No one argued. The room emptied in a sweep of black suits, soft shoes, and swallowed questions. The 4 household staff disappeared first. Then the 3 rival crew observers were escorted out with visible reluctance. The 8 from the DeLuca family inner circle moved last, each one glancing back once at Romano DeLuca, then at me, like I had become a problem no one had planned for. When the doors shut, silence changed shape. It was no longer public. It was private, close, breathing. Luca DeLuca stood between me and the exit, not blocking me exactly, but making it clear that leaving would now be my choice against his will. You speak Italian? He asked. A little. How little? Enough to know when someone is being spoken around instead of spoken to. His eyes stayed on mine. Dark. Sharp. Measuring. Who taught you? My grandmother. That was true. Which meant he hated it even more, because truth is harder to break than a lie. Romano DeLuca made a sound then. Not a word. More like breath catching on an old lock. I turned toward him before I could stop myself. Luca DeLuca saw that too. Look at me, he said. I did. Why did you do it? Because I couldn't stand the sight of a living man being handled like furniture. Because the whole room had agreed that power was cleaner if no one named the cruelty inside it. Because I knew what silence did to a body. But I gave him the version he could use. Because he heard me. Luca DeLuca studied my face with the patience of someone used to finding hidden compartments in people. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. For a second, I thought he would have me thrown out. Instead, he walked to a side table, picked up a thin folder, and held it without opening it. My people checked you before you arrived tonight, he said. After that scene in the courtyard, they checked again. Cold crept under my skin. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Men like Luca DeLuca had other people do the shouting for them. The real threat lived in calm. Elena Moretti, 29. No criminal record. No political connections. No rich boyfriend. No family leverage worth using. His gaze sharpened. A very ordinary life. Ordinary. I almost laughed. Student debt. Late rent. Night shifts. Coffee gone cold 3 times before sunrise. Fear measured in grocery totals. There was nothing ordinary about surviving month to month. What do you want from me? I asked. The truth. I already gave it. No. He set the folder down with careful precision. You gave me something polished enough to carry in your pocket. I want the thing underneath. Before I could answer, Romano DeLuca made that sound again. This time it was clearer. A syllable. Every nerve in Luca DeLuca's body shifted. I saw it. Not in his face. In his shoulders. In the way he half-turned, like a son before a boss. I stepped closer to Romano DeLuca. Luca DeLuca moved instantly. Stop. Romano DeLuca lifted his hand again. For me. Not for his son. The air thinned. I crouched beside the chair slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Breath caught in my throat as I lowered myself beside the chair, close enough to hear the faint rasp of Romano DeLuca's breathing. His skin looked almost transparent under the library lamps. The room smelled like old leather, dust, and expensive whiskey that no one had touched. His eyes, cloudy a second ago, fixed on me with sudden force. His lips moved again. Casa, he whispered. The word landed harder than a shout. Home. I felt Luca DeLuca go still behind me. Not the stillness of calm. The stillness of a man whose body had turned to locked steel. I looked up at Romano DeLuca, then back at his son. Luca DeLuca's jaw flexed once. A pulse beat hard in his neck. You heard that before? I said quietly. Luca DeLuca did not answer. Romano DeLuca's fingers closed weakly around my wrist. His grip was thin, but desperate. He kept looking at me as if I had stepped out of a grave he had been staring into for years. Who used that word with you? I asked him. His mouth trembled. A breath. A struggle. Then his eyes filled so suddenly it hurt to watch. Not confusion. Memory. One of the household staff shifted near the doorway, uneasy. The sound made Luca DeLuca snap his attention toward them. Out. No one argued. All 4 household staff disappeared at once, silent and fast. The heavy door shut. The click echoed across the marble hall outside, then died. Now it was just us. Romano DeLuca in the chair. Luca DeLuca standing over us like a storm refusing to break. Me kneeling between a father's silence and a son's anger. I need the truth, I said. Luca DeLuca gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. You think one word gives you that? No, I said. But it opens something. It opens nothing. Romano DeLuca made a rough sound in his throat. This time, Luca DeLuca flinched. I saw it clearly. For the first time, the powerful man everyone else feared looked like a son who had spent years waiting outside a locked door. I turned back to Romano DeLuca. Casa, I said softly. Home where? His gaze drifted past me to the far wall. There, above a dark sideboard, hung a framed black and white photograph I had barely noticed before. A younger Romano DeLuca stood beside a stone house on a steep hillside. A woman beside him had one hand on her stomach. Her smile was small, careful, almost guarded. Italian coast. Old country. Old life. Romano DeLuca's fingers trembled harder. Luca DeLuca saw where I was looking and went cold. Enough. No, I said, standing now. That picture matters. His eyes cut to mine. You are inside my house, asking questions no one here asks. And no one here gets answers. I shot back. The words hung there. Sharp. Dangerous. For a second I thought he would throw me out himself. Instead, Luca DeLuca walked to the sideboard, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folded letter so worn at the edges it looked handled 1,000 times and hated every single one. He held it, not giving it to me yet. My father stopped speaking the year that letter came, Luca DeLuca said. Each word sounded dragged over broken glass. Not all at once. First less, then only when necessary, then almost never. Romano DeLuca shut his eyes. Luca DeLuca stared at the letter, not at either of us. It came from Italy, from the village where he was born. Someone betrayed someone. That is the story I got as a child. His mouth hardened. A weak story. Clean. Convenient. What really happened? I asked. His gaze lifted to me, dark and raw. A woman died. The room seemed to lose air. I looked at the photograph again. The woman with the guarded smile. The hand over her stomach. Romano DeLuca's breathing turned shallow. She was carrying a child, Luca DeLuca said. My father's first family. Hidden before America. Hidden before power. Hidden before this name meant anything in New York. He finally handed me the letter. The paper felt older than the room. Its edges had gone soft with time, but the fold in the middle was sharp, as if grief had kept opening it over and over. I took the letter from Luca DeLuca's hand and felt every eye in the study move toward me. Not just his. The whole house. Silence in that estate was never empty. It listened. Romano DeLuca sat by the fire with his jaw locked, staring at nothing. The confession about the hidden woman had cracked something open, but it had not made the room kinder. It had made it hungry. I unfolded the page. The handwriting was in Italian. Tight. Slanted. A woman's hand, I thought. I could read enough to understand the shape of it before I understood the pain. A plea. A promise. A warning. She wrote that if anything happened, the child must never be brought to men who valued a family name more than blood. She wrote that New York would make monsters out of men who had once been poor and frightened. Then one line stopped me cold. I had seen that surname before. Not DeLuca. Mine. Moretti. My fingers went numb. This letter mentions a Moretti. The fire popped. One of the 8 people from the DeLuca family inner circle shifted behind me. Another drew in a breath too fast to hide it. Across the long room, 2 of the 4 household staff lowered their eyes at the same time, like they already knew fear had entered the house and did not want to be caught looking at it. Luca took 1 step toward me. Where? I pointed to the line. He read it once. Then again, slower. She trusted a dockworker's family in Naples, I said, hearing my own voice thin out. A Moretti family. The child was supposed to be left with them if Romano DeLuca failed to return. Romano made a sound in his throat. Not a word. More like a wound, remembering it had a mouth. That changed everything. Until then, I had been the outsider who managed to reach the old man when no one else could. Strange. Useful. Dangerous in a personal way. But this was different. This gave my presence a shape people could hate. If my dead family had crossed paths with theirs before America, before the money, before the blood-soaked empire, then I was no longer a coincidence. I was a threat to memory, to inheritance, to every lie that had survived by staying buried. Movement flickered at the doorway. 3 men stood there, dressed too clean to be staff and too still to belong in a family moment. The rival crew observers. I had noticed them earlier in the day through the rain-streaked front windows, smoking beneath the stone arch near the black SUVs. Now they were inside the edge of the house like bad weather that had found a crack in the wall. No one announced them. No one needed to. Luca turned without raising his voice. You were not invited into this room. One of the 3 lifted his hands. Easy smile, dead eyes. Word travels. Old men wake up. Secrets move money. So that was the smell in the air. Not just grief. Profit. I looked back at the letter. At the ink. At my own last name, sitting inside a secret older than the city outside these walls. My father had died with almost nothing. A Union jacket. An old rosary. A rusted key he kept in a kitchen drawer and never explained. I had thought poverty erased people. Now I felt the opposite. Sometimes it preserved the wrong details until they came back like a knife. Luca crossed the room and took the letter from my hand. Not rough. Final. No one leaves with this. One of the inner circle spoke then, the first crack from that side. If her family was named in it, she can make a claim. I turned. I don't want your money. That won't matter. Another said quietly. What people believe will matter. Belief. That was the thing pressing on all of us harder than the walls of that room. Not truth. Not grief. Belief. The letter was still in Luca DeLuca's hand when Romano DeLuca made a sound behind us. Not the dry cough of an old man. Not another broken syllable that sent the household staff running on fear alone. A real sound. Low. Deliberate. Elena. My name. Every head turned so fast I heard fabric pull and shoe leather scrape over marble. The 8 from the DeLuca family inner circle froze like a single body. Even the 3 rival crew observers near the doorway forgot to hide what was on their faces. Shock. Pure and ugly. The 4 household staff looked ready to cross themselves. Romano DeLuca was watching only me. He lifted one hand. Not toward Luca. Toward the hall. Luca went still in a way that felt more dangerous than anger. Everyone out. No one argued. That told me more than the order itself. The room emptied in a rush of black suits, lowered eyes, and swallowed questions. One of the household staff closed the double doors behind them. The latch clicked. Soft. Final. Then it was only the three of us. Rain tapped the tall windows. Fire cracked in the grate. Luca stood between me and the door, the letter folded once in his fist. Romano sat beneath the amber light with a wool blanket over his knees, looking less like a legend than a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long. You said one word, Romano said. His voice was rough, but warm in a way that made Luca's face change. Not much, just enough to hurt. I swallowed. I know. No, Romano said. You know the sound, not the wound inside it. He looked at Luca then, and for the first time since I had entered that house, I saw hesitation in Luca DeLuca. Not strategic caution. Something older. Something that belonged to a son, not a boss. Romano held out his hand to me. Luca's eyes cut to mine. Warning. Protection. Maybe both. I stepped around him anyway. Romano's fingers were cool and dry when they closed over mine. He turned my palm up and traced one line there with his thumb, as if memory lived under skin. The word you used, he said quietly, was the first word my wife said to me after our daughter was born. The air left my lungs. Luca did not move. What daughter? Romano closed his eyes. That was the answer before the answer. When she came, he said, she did not breathe right away. The room was full of panic. Then she cried. Your mother laughed and said that word. A private word. A foolish little word we made for miracle. For something returned when you thought God had taken it. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. The letter. My family name in it. The way Romano had stared at me from the first night, like he was trying to see through time. Romano opened his eyes and looked straight at me. 3 months later, she was gone. Gone how? Luca asked. His voice was flat, but I heard the fracture under it. Romano's hand tightened around mine. Taken from the nursery during a wake held in this house. We searched. We paid. We buried men over rumors. Nothing came back except a knitted blanket left near the river. His mouth shook once. Your mother never recovered. After she died, I stopped answering warmth with warmth. I considered it a punishment I had earned. The room seemed to tilt. Lucas stared at his father like the floor had opened under him. You told me she died. I told you what let this family keep standing. Romano's eyes hardened. There were enemies watching even then. A missing child was weakness. A dead child was tragedy. Tragedy earns sympathy. Weakness invites knives. My stomach turned cold. The letter. Romano nodded. Luca unfolded it at last with fingers that had probably signed death orders without shaking. Now they shook. The paper made a dry, brittle sound in Luca DeLuca's hands, louder than the rain striking the tall windows. I could hear every breath in that room. Romano DeLuca sat straight in his chair, one hand resting on the cane across his lap, as if the confession he had just made had cost him nothing. It had cost me my balance. It had cost Luca DeLuca something worse. Certainty. I watched his eyes move across the letter once. Then again. Slower. The fire snapped in the marble hearth. Nobody from the DeLuca family inner circle spoke. All 8 of them looked caught between fear and calculation. The 4 household staff near the wall had gone still in that old, trained way people do inside rich houses where one wrong sound can change a life. Then Luca DeLuca lifted his head and looked at Romano DeLuca. When was this written? 31 years ago, Romano DeLuca said. And you kept it. I kept us alive. His voice did not rise. That was the worst part. No apology. No weakness. Just the cold arithmetic that had built the empire around us. I stepped closer before I could stop myself. What does it say? Luca DeLuca didn't answer right away. His jaw locked. Then he read one line aloud. Each word dragged over broken glass. If anything happens, tell my son the child lived. The room changed. Not slowly. At once. I felt it in the way shoulders stiffened. In the sharp little silence that followed. In the tiny shift of eyes across the faces around us. The secret was no longer a family wound. It was leverage. Luca DeLuca understood that before I did. He folded the letter once and turned, not toward Romano DeLuca, but toward the 8 people gathered near the long dining table. Nobody leaves this room. One of them answered too fast. Luca DeLuca, that's not necessary. It was enough. I saw his gaze cut there like a blade. That means it is. The three rival crew observers had been kept outside all evening under the excuse of rain and protocol, but news inside a house like this moved faster than bullets. I knew that too late. A muffled vibration came from somewhere near the table. A phone. Then another, hurriedly silenced. Luca DeLuca crossed the room in 3 strides and snatched one device from a man in the inner circle before it could disappear into a pocket. He glanced at the screen. His face emptied. I had never seen rage turn so quiet. "Who are you warning?" Nobody answered. The first gun did not come from outside. It came from inside the family. A loyalist I had seen pouring wine an hour earlier shoved one of the household staff aside and reached under his jacket. The movement flashed in the firelight. Luca DeLuca moved before I even understood what I was seeing. The shot cracked through the room, deafening, wild, blowing splinters from the carved wood panel behind Romano DeLuca's chair. People screamed. Chairs scraped. Glass shattered. I dropped behind the sofa as Luca DeLuca slammed the gunman into the edge of the table hard enough to flip crystal and silver onto the floor. 2 more men surged forward at once, not to protect him, but to stop him. My blood went cold. Not confusion. Betrayal. The rival pressure had already found a door inside the house. Elena Moretti. His voice hit through the chaos. Not panic. Command. I looked up. Luca DeLuca had one man on the floor and another by the throat, but his eyes were on me. Not because I was helpless. Because he had understood something I hadn't. This wasn't about killing Romano DeLuca anymore. It was about erasing what I had unlocked between them. I saw it then in one of the men breaking away from the fight and coming straight toward me. Not toward the letter. Toward me. I grabbed the heavy brass fire poker from the hearth before he reached me. My hands shook, but not enough. He lunged. I swung. Metal cracked against bone. Metal cracked against bone. The man folded hard at my feet, one hand flying to his temple, blood slipping through his fingers onto the Persian rug. The sound cut through the room sharper than the gunshots outside. For one breath, everything stopped. I stood there with the brass poker in both hands, my chest heaving, the taste of smoke and iron stuck to the back of my throat. I had never hit anyone in my life, but I had, and now every eye at the table turned toward me. The dining room looked like a kingdom split open. Crystal shook in the chandelier above us. Candlelight flashed over marble, silver, and the long, dark table where the DeLuca family inner circle had risen halfway from their chairs. The 4 household staff were pressed against the wall, pale and frozen. Near the tall windows, the 3 rival crew observers no longer bothered pretending they were only guests. Their faces had changed. They had come to witness weakness. Instead, they had watched me survive it. Luca DeLuca crossed the room in 3 strides and dragged the injured man away from me with one hand, shoving him toward the others. His tailored suit was torn at the shoulder. Blood darkened one cuff. His eyes found mine only once. Stay behind me. Normally, that command would have burned. This time, it landed like a warning from someone who already knew the next blow was not coming from a gun. Because Romano DeLuca was standing. A second earlier, I had thought he was still trapped inside that deep, unreachable silence. Then I heard the scrape of his chair against the floor. Slow, heavy, final. Every person in that room went still. Romano DeLuca kept one hand on the table for balance. His face looked carved from old stone, but his eyes were alive now. Not vacant, not lost, furious, grieving, awake. I felt my pulse in my teeth. The letter lay open near his plate. The paper that had nearly gotten me killed. The paper Luca DeLuca had tried to hide. The paper that had carried one word from a past this house had buried under money, loyalty, and fear. I had said it. One Italian word. And something locked inside Romano DeLuca had broken open. Romano DeLuca looked first at me. When he spoke, his voice came out rough, like it had torn its way through years of rust. You remembered her. The room seemed to tilt. I lowered the poker an inch. I didn't know her, I said. My own voice sounded small in the huge room. I only knew the word mattered. Romano DeLuca closed his eyes for half a second, and when he opened them again, he looked at Luca DeLuca. That was when I understood this was not a family dinner gone violent. This was a burial being interrupted. She said that word the night they took her, Romano DeLuca said. No one moved. Not the 8 at the table. Not the staff. Not the 3 men by the windows. Even the house itself seemed to lean in. Luca DeLuca's face changed without changing. That was the only way I could describe it. He did not flinch. He did not step back, but something inside him went rigid with a pain so old it had probably shaped the man he became. You told me she ran, Luca DeLuca said. Romano DeLuca's hand tightened against the table edge. I told you the lie that kept you alive. The words dropped like knives. I looked at Luca DeLuca. He was not the man who had threatened judges or buried enemies under concrete rumors and expensive silence. He was a son standing in the ruins of the first wound of his life. Romano DeLuca lifted one trembling finger toward the three rival crew observers. The order came through their family, he said. Not for money, not for territory, for punishment. She tried to speak. I let fear make me quiet. Your mother was taken because I stayed silent. A sharp breath tore out of someone at the table. I did not look away from Luca DeLuca. His jaw locked. You knew? Romano DeLuca nodded once. It looked like a confession and an execution at the same time. I knew. And then I made you inherit my silence. That hit harder than the gunfire had. I finally understood why my one word mattered. It was not magic. It was memory. It was the last thing his mother had said before fear turned this family into stone. And I had dragged that buried sound back into the light in front of blood, allies, enemies, and the son who had built an empire out of never needing truth. One of the rival crew observers shifted toward the door. Luca DeLuca noticed. So did I? But Luca DeLuca did not reach for a weapon first. He looked at me, then at Romano DeLuca, then back at the men who had just been exposed inside his own house. When he spoke, his voice was low enough to make everyone lean closer. Who gave the order? The room went so quiet I could hear the old clock in the West Hall breathing through the walls. No one moved. Not the 8 members of the DeLuca family inner circle. Not the 4 household staff standing near the service doors with their faces drained white. Not even the 3 rival crew observers who had come to watch weakness and had just seen something far more dangerous than weakness. Truth. Romano DeLuca lifted his head another inch. It looked small. It felt seismic. His hand was still shaking around mine, but his eyes were clear now. Not young, not healed, just clear. Like a man who had spent years buried alive and had finally clawed one hand through the dirt. Luca DeLuca stood at the head of the long table, broad shoulders locked, jaw hard enough to cut glass. I had seen men fear him all night. I had feared him too. But this was different. This was a son standing in the ruins of the lie that built his house. Who gave the order? He asked again. This time Romano DeLuca answered. Not loudly, not with force, but with enough breath to split the room open. Family, he said. The word landed like a shot. One of the inner circle cursed under his breath. Another took one step back. I watched it happen all at once. The tiny betrayals of the body. Eyes dropping, shoulders tightening, a ringed hand reaching for a glass and missing it. Luca DeLuca saw it too. He did not shout. That made it worse. He walked slowly around the table, each step soft against the marble floor, until he stopped behind the man whose cufflinks had been trembling since Romano DeLuca spoke my word back to me in that old Italian dialect. Look at him, Luca DeLuca said. The man did not. Luca DeLuca put one hand on the back of the chair and bent close. I said, look at my father. The man raised his eyes. Romano DeLuca stared at him with the terrible calm of someone who no longer had anything left to lose. Then Romano DeLuca spoke again, each word rough, dragged over broken glass. My brother's son. A breath tore through the room. That was the last hidden hinge. Not an outside war. Not a random betrayal. Blood. One branch of the family had buried another under silence, then wrapped the wound in loyalty and called it order. The men tied to the competing New York family had not planted the first poison. They had only been feeding on it, waiting for the DeLuca house to crack open from the inside. I finally understood why no doctor, no priest, no son had reached Romano DeLuca. He had not lost language. He had buried it in the face of the one betrayal he could not survive naming. Luca DeLuca straightened slowly. The color had left his face, but his voice came out colder than winter steel. You kept him alive so he could stay silent. No one answered. They did not need to. I watched Luca DeLuca make the hardest choice in the room. Not revenge first. Judgment first. He turned to the 4 household staff. You leave this room now. None of this touches you. Then to the 3 rival crew observers. You came here to witness a fall. You'll witness a cleansing instead. Sit down. They sat. Only then did he face his own blood. What happened next did not feel like violence. It felt like surgery without anesthesia. Names were spoken. Accounts exposed. Old favors dragged into the light. A hidden medication schedule. Switched prescriptions. Controlled access. Years of making Romano DeLuca look unreachable so no one would ask why he went silent after one dinner, one argument, one vanished confession. And when it was over, the house did not look the same. Neither did Luca DeLuca. He came to me last. For one second I thought he would thank me. He didn't. He looked at me as if I had walked into his fortress with bare hands and broken the lock no one else could even see.